What if I told you the most powerful object in modern civilization, more influential than armies, presidents, or oil, is something that doesn't actually exist? What if the US dollar, the currency trusted by billions and used by nearly every nation, is not a stable foundation, but a carefully engineered illusion, one designed not to store value, but to extract it, one that has survived not because it is strong, but because the alternatives are weaker? Tonight, we're going to peel back a century of financial engineering, revealing how the dollar went from a simple piece of paper to the world's most dangerous illusion, and why its greatest risk is still ahead. And it all begins with a story almost nobody was supposed to notice. To understand the dollar's transformation, we need to rewind to the early 1900s, when America was just beginning to realize its power.
On the surface, the US was industrializing, inventing, expanding.
But even they didn't know how far the dollar's reach would grow, or how radically it would change, because the real turning points weren't planned. They were reactions to crisis, and each crisis made the illusion stronger and more dangerous. When the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, the dollar was still tied to gold. Every paper note represented something real, stored in a vault. But this system had a flaw. It limited how quickly governments could expand their power and spending. So every time the US faced a major shock, leaders realized the gold anchor was a chain around their ankle. World War I, the Great Depression, World War II. Each crisis forced the US to issue more dollars than its gold could support. Each crisis weakened the illusion of value on, strengthened the power of the people who controlled the money supply. But the real transformation, the one that would make the dollar a global empire, came in 1944. As World War II ended, the world needed a new financial order. Nations were broke. Economies were shattered. Gold reserves were scattered across continents. And then came Bretton Woods, the agreement that changed everything. There, 44 countries agreed that the US dollar, not gold, would become the center of global finance. Other currencies would peg to the dollar, and the dollar would peg to gold. On paper, it was brilliant. In practice, it was impossible. The US now held most of the world's gold, but not nearly enough to match the flood of dollars it would soon create. And as America became a global superpower building bases, funding wars, expanding its influence, the world accepted more and more dollars, trusting they were backed by something real. They weren't. Behind the scenes, confidence was collapsing. Countries like France began demanding gold instead of paper. The dollar promises were cracking. And then, in August 1971, the illusion fractured. President Richard Nixon stepped on national television and announced something no one thought possible. The US would temporarily suspend the dollar's convertibility into gold. And with that single sentence, the dollar became a currency backed by nothing except faith. This was the moment money stopped being a measure of value and became a tool that governments could print, a tool that central banks could manipulate, a tool that no longer restrains spending, borrowing, or political ambition. The world waited for chaos, but something unexpected happened. Instead of collapsing, the dollar became stronger, because the United States had already built something more powerful than gold: oil. In the mid-1970s, the US struck a deal with Saudi Arabia, the world's leading oil exporter. The agreement was simple: all global oil sales must be priced in US dollars. This forced every nation, rich or poor, hostile or friendly, to hold and use dollars. If they wanted energy, they needed dollars. If they wanted dollars, they needed American banks, American debt, and American markets. The dollar became the lifeblood of global trade. And like all empires, it demanded tribute. Except this time, the tribute was interest on us debt. The system was genius, but every empire that grows on extraction eventually faces the same fate. The moment where growth becomes dependency, and dependency becomes danger. By the 1980s and 90s, the US had discovered a new superpower. It could print prosperity. Stock markets soared. Real estate boomed. Banks leveraged more than ever before. And the world followed, buying trillions in US treasuries, convinced the dollar was unbeatable. But the illusion had a cost. Every time something went wrong: Black Monday in '87, the dot-com crash of 2000, the great financial crisis of 2008, the solution was the same: print more dollars, lower interest rates, and expand debt. It was a simple formula: cause, effect. Bigger cause, bigger effect. Bigger effect. Until eventually, the system required perpetual crisis just to survive. And today, the numbers are staggering. The US now has over $35 trillion in national debt. Global dollar-denominated debt exceeds $100 trillion. Over 60% of all foreign exchange reserves are still held in dollars. More than 80% of global trade touches the dollar at some point. This is not stability. This is dependency on a single, over-leveraged currency holding the entire world economy hostage. Which brings us to the present. Look at the pattern over the last 2 decades. In 2008, banks collapsed. The Fed printed money. The dollar strengthened. In 2020, global lockdowns paralyzed the economy. The Fed printed trillions more. The dollar strengthened. In 2022, inflation spiked. The Fed raised rates. The dollar strengthened again. Now, we face massive debt and rising geopolitical tensions. And still, the dollar remains strong. The illusion holds, not because it's stable, but because every alternative seems weaker. For now, but cracks are forming. Countries are quietly reducing their dollar reserves. The BRICS bloc is actively developing alternative payment systems. Major energy deals between powerful nations are being priced outside of dollars for the first time in 50 years. Meanwhile, the interest payment on US debt alone is approaching $1 trillion per year, a number that can swallow entire federal budgets. The dollar's strength is starting to look less like dominance, and more like a bubble protected only by belief. And history shows that belief is the most fragile asset of all. So, here are 3 key takeaways from this story. First, the dollar was never designed to hold global responsibility. It became the world's currency by accident, through crisis, and with political engineering, not because it was inherently stable. Second, every major strengthening of the dollar came from a collapse. It thrives when systems break, not when they function properly. That makes it powerful, but inherently dangerous. And third, no illusion lasts forever. Not even one backed by the world's largest economy. Eventually, either the system changes voluntarily, or reality forces a change upon it. The dollar won't disappear tomorrow or next year, but systems built on illusion always end the same way. Slowly at first, then all at once. The question isn't whether the dollar will remain dominant forever. The real question is, what happens to the world when the illusion can no longer be maintained? Thanks for watching. If this made you think, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the systems that shape our world.